Hey everyone, Bodie Morningway here from Quantum Comics, your friendly neighborhood comic book store where adventure awaits. Alright, so welcome to another edition of Coffee and Comic Books. I've got my coffee, I've got my cohort, Mr. Stanley, that's right. Now, today I actually want to talk a bit about Superman, but first I want to talk about these awesome things. So, as you can read, this is our Cosmic Crate. Now you may be asking, well, Bodie, what is a Cosmic Crate? Let me tell you. We have two options available, $50 product and $100 product. So what that is we pack up one of these amazing crates that I ditzy up and make all nice and awesome looking, packed with an assortment of incredibly awesome things within based on whatever theme you want. It can be a complete and total surprise if you like, or it can be exactly what you ask for, depending both on yourself and what we have in stock, of course. You can reach us through our Facebook page, through Messenger. You can send us an email. Just send it to hq@quantumcomics.ca. And we accept credit card and electronic fund transfer. We're available for curbside pickup, delivery for a small fee in and around the Camrose area, and of course shipping, as long as you pay the shipping. I'm perfectly happy to pack these babies up and head on to the postal office. But now, onward to Superman. So, Superman has been around for a very, very long time. In fact, he was the first real superhero. Before that, for the most part, you had your mystery type men like the Phantom and, street level, rugged kind of detective types like Dick Tracy and things like that. And of course, you had Tarzan. But other than that, maybe a Buck Rogers here and there, but that tended more towards the sci-fi than it did the actual superheroics. But when Superman came along, in Action Comics #1, which actually I believe might be reprinted in here. This is 80 years, of Action Comics within this. Obviously, you're not going to get all of them. They highlight certain issues, and that is actually the cover, a piece of the cover of the very first one. But Superman was the first real superhero. He's from another planet. He fought crime. Of course, back then, he ended up killing a lot of criminals just with his super strength and stuff, because that's what they did way back then. He was also used in various things, even propaganda during the war. There was a cover of one of the Superman comics that actually said, "Superman says it's okay to slap a Jap." Nasty stuff when you see it, and you can see it online if you like. I'm sure there's probably more examples of that as well, but I mean, being the big American icon and wanting to get people part of the war effort, it's bound to lead to some propaganda. But essentially, the character stands for truth and justice and the American way, which shouldn't be propaganda. It is actually the classic American way, goodness and all those wonderful, iconic things, liberty. But Superman was around for a very long time, and he was always really, really powerful. But they kept on making him more and more powerful until there was a point where he could literally juggle planets. Now, as you might be able to surmise, that can cause a lot of problems for the writers, because who are you going to put Superman up against that's even a conceivable threat? Because by that point, he could do so many things, and he wasn't dumb. He was also really intelligent. So even though Lex Luthor was still his nemesis, Superman could almost match wits with him all the time, and that was the one thing that could put Luthor ahead. Now it was really just money. But this led to the 80s into a little series called Crisis, whereby which DC used that as kind of a jumpstart to all its titles. And much like the rest of the universe, Superman was also rebooted. His powers were marginalized, meaning that they were lessened. He wasn't quite as powerful. He was still the most powerful character around, but not to the degree that he used to be. And that started with John Byrne's Man of Steel, which, if you haven't read it, I highly suggest finding these, picking them up, because from art to storyline, it is some of the best work that I've seen out of not just John Byrne, but anybody. It's just beautiful artwork, beautiful pacing to the storyline, and John Byrne makes Superman an absolutely incredible character. I mean, he was already an incredible character, but somehow he managed to make him even better. And then, of course, it continued. Other creators took on Superman, and you had many epic storylines. Dan Jurgens was another one of my favorites. Definitely check him out. He helped do The Death of Superman, which of course was very epic for the time period, which was mid-90s, if I'm remembering correct. No, early 90s. Yes, early 90s. And this was huge. These days, comic book characters die all the time. I mean, Marvel Comics actually had a quota, a character death quota, whereby every quarter of the year they would kill one character. And of course they always come back, right? But when Superman died, that was so huge. Nothing like that had ever happened before, and nobody knew what was going to happen, right? So obviously the comic books of the death of Superman, of course he was killed by this crazy looking guy here, Doomsday. He was kind of like an Incredible Hulk clone, but even nastier. Anyways, by the end of it, they ended up killing each other. Spoiler, sorry, but not much of a spoiler. I'm sure everybody knows that already. And then those comic books, they just rocketed up in price. And if you had those back then, you were in the money, so to speak. Of course, then, as everyone knows, they slowly brought him back. But first, they had a series called The Return of the Superman, whereby 4 individuals claimed to be the actual Superman. There was a Superboy who hated being called Superboy. He always wanted to be called Superman. He was actually a clone of Superman. There was this guy wearing kind of goggles and visors. He ended up being a Kryptonian android called the Eradicator. Then there was a cyborg Superman. He actually ended up being called Cyborg Superman, but he ended up being a bad guy. He was a dude by the name of Hank Henshaw, and he just hated Superman, wanted to obliterate him. That's a whole other story. And finally, there was this guy totally encased in steel, and he was actually called Steel. He was the only one that never claimed to be the actual Superman, just being, he just wanted to represent the values of Superman. Anyways, of course, none of them ended up becoming Superman. In fact, the real Superman came back. He was regenerated through a mixture of sunlight and Kryptonian pseudoscience kind of stuff. But yeah, and to this day, Superman is still kicking. Him and Lois, in the comic books, they're married. They have a kid. And it's very intriguing. A lot of good stuff. Currently, Brian Michael Bendis is at the helm of Superman, along with a rotating cast of artists in both Action Comics and Superman, the main title. But yeah, that's your little step into some comic book history for our episode of Coffee and Comic Books. See you guys next time.